Welcome to Illo Talk. I am Corey Kerr, and today a crash course on how I make things move. So I'm just going to go through and do a little dealio on what exactly I do, my tips and tricks, my plugins of how I make stuff in After Effects kind of move around. So let's check it out.
This is Illo Talk.
Now, I always start out by storyboarding. So I have these big storyboards that I'll do, and I'm basically just trying to figure out what are the assets that I need, how do they move, how am I going to tell this story. So before I start making a bunch of things, I just take a Sharpie and I just go in and I storyboard it all out. And that way I know what do I need to make, how do I need to make it, what does it need to look like, the composition of it. And then what I do is I go in and I will use those storyboards, break them up, and animate them into an animatic. This animatic is like the sketching equivalent of animation, basically. And so you take the storyboards, I just cut them up really quick in Photoshop. It doesn't matter if they look good or not, because what you're trying to figure out is timing and composition. And in the case of like this animatic, I figured out like some of the pieces were too long or too short. So the way that they were bending and rotating didn't really work. And then you go in and you finish it from there. But this is, for me, the beginning. This is the planning stage. Is I start with the storyboards. I'll either do those digitally or on paper. And then I come in and I do an animatic with those storyboards. So the first thing, and one of the most basic things that I do, is rotation and parenting. And so I'll show you how I do that in a minute, but this is kind of basically what you can do. Like this bucket here, you see that it's just kind of rotating, the wheels are rotating, but where this arm moves, the bucket moves. And you can kind of see it even more over here, wherever this tractor goes, the rest of these parts, they're just individual parts, but they're going to go with it. But then when this big one moves, the other one moves. And so that's just kind of a big thing. You just parent it to itself. Sorry, you parent it to something else, and then when that thing rotates, it rotates. And so I can come in here like this, and I can grab, one of these, for example, and I rotate it. And you can see that I can just kind of move that around. Here's some interesting things that you can do with parenting and rotation. I'll show you how I set it up in a minute, but you can see that this is actually rotating in 3D space. It's all flat 2D layers, but you can make it turn and rotate and pivot in 3D space. And so I've got this kind of set up over here, and I've turned everything into a 3D object, and you can see that the head, it pivots, right? It's going to pivot on the anchor point. And so you move that anchor point around, and I can make the head go up or down, or I can put a wiggle expression on this that will just do that for it, right? So it just automatically does that. The cool thing, though, is I can come in here and I can flap the wings as well. And so if something is in 3D, right, you can kind of do that. If I turn the body here like this, so let me hit rotation, and let's rotate the body, then we just have him look directly at us. You can see that they're just a bunch of like flat layers that are kind of just sort of spaced out. And so if I go like this, then I can just move some of those layers down. So I'm just going to say rotate down, right? So that'll go down and up like that, which ends up looking like this. So kind of fun. A little 2.5D, as some people call it, because it's kind of halfway in between 2D and 3D. But that's rotation, and you just parent things together. So everything is parented to the body, and as the body pivots, everything else pivots with it because it's parented to the body. The next one is a wiggle expression, or it's basically a little bit of code that causes a random number generator. And there's two different parts to it. The first part is the frequency, and the second part is the amplitude. There's a bunch of other stuff, but you can just ignore it. The frequency is how frequently or how often per second that thing happens. So the higher that number, the faster that thing is. So if you say 5, then it would happen 5 times per second. If you say 0.5, then it would take 2 seconds to go all the way through it, right? The second part of it is called the amplitude. And the amplitude is the amount. And so on these examples, you can see like the little bits surrounding the eyes. I've just got they just kind of wiggle back and forth. They're rotating. Basically, I put a wiggle expression on the rotation, and I just had those kind of jiggle back and forth. In the lower right-hand corner there, you can see that little button kind of going in and out like that. I just put a wiggle expression on the X position, and it just kind of moves back and forth. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. So wiggle is pretty straightforward. Frequency, amplitude, like I said before. So let's twirl into this object and let's look at all the different things we can control. I'm not going to worry about the anchor point. Position, I like to right click and separate the dimensions. And we can go like this. So you Alt click on that. You can start typing it in. It's just wiggle and then parentheses. And then the first number is frequency, comma, second number is amplitude. So speed and amount, right? And so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say on the X position, I want it to move, kind of slowly. So I'm just going to go once per second, and then let's just make it move 500 pixels. Okay. And so you'll see it's just going to drift back and forth between a range of 500 pixels once every second. It's a random number generator. So at any given time, you can see down here, it's 800 and whatever. Okay. And now it's 900 and whatever, right? And I can also go in and I can add a similar thing. I can just copy this, come over to Y position, paste it in, okay? And now it's going to kind of seemingly drift all over the place because the X position, the Y position are independent of each other and both have a wiggle, okay? Now let's do something weird. I'm gonna take the Y position, I'm just going to take it down so that it kind of vibrates a little bit. And I'm going to speed it up. So I'm going to put 10 in the frequency and 5 in the pixels. And so you'll see that I'm going to turn off. The X. So you'll see here that it just kind of moves up and down. Let's make that 50 pixels just so you can see it a little bit better. But it's faster because I increased the frequency. Okay. But I can also do other things. I can do scale. So I'm going to Alt click on that. And watch this, and it's going to change size as it's bouncing up and down. Okay, I can do rotation. Now here's the difference on these things. The amplitude is the unit of measurement of that particular control. And so in rotation, you're dealing in degrees of a circle. So everything is between 0 to 360 degrees. You can go more than that, but it'll rotate more, but you're dealing in degrees. Okay, position is dealing pixels along an axis, x-axis, y-axis, z-axis. And so the measurement is pixels. Scale is dealing percentage of 100, right? And so and opacity is percent of opacity. And so I can come in here and I can say wiggle, and on rotation, I'm going to make it really slow, and I'm going to say 0.25, so a quarter of a second, which means it's going to take 4 seconds to rotate all the way through, and I'm going to say 360 degrees. Okay, and so now it is going to rotate around 360 degrees, but fairly slowly, but it's still doing it kind of randomly. And then I can do the same thing here. I can say, give me wiggle on the opacity, and let's say we just want it to blink really fast. I'm going to say 15 times per second, do 100 different things, right? And so it's going to range between 0 and 100, 15 times a second. So it's just going to blink in and out. I'm going to kill Y here so that it stops moving around so much so we can kind of just see it. You see how it's just kind of blinking? Okay, and I can still come in and scale this up, and it'll just do that from there. So wiggle is something that I love. You can get a lot of random movement out of wiggle. Now another thing I do often is I do loop out expression, and the loop out expression basically does, it loops through keyframes. So instead of having to copy and paste keyframes over and over and over and over again, you can just say, just play those again. And you can do it two ways. The first way is you can do loop out cycle, where it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then on the fourth one, it's going to jump back to 1 again, or however many keyframes there are. On the last keyframe, it jumps back to the first one. So if the last keyframe and the first keyframe are not the same, you'll see like a little jump cut. The other one is ping pong, and ping pong will play forward 1, 2, 3, and then it'll reverse 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, like a game of ping pong. Anyway, super fun, and it makes it really easy. So let me just show you really quickly what I'm talking about here. So if I want to take the position of this ball, and I'm going to move it from the left side of the screen, and let's just start at 0 here. And in about half a second, let's move it to the right side of the screen. Okay. If I want it to come back, I can copy and paste this first keyframe there. Okay. But for right now, I want to show you what it does. So let's have it take a second just so it's not so jumpy. Okay. And then I'm going to Alt click on that. And then I'm going to go loop out. And you can just leave it there because it'll default to cycle. And there's no more keyframes after this, but you notice that when it gets to the second keyframe, it plays the first key through that loop again. Okay, so that's pretty cool. But I can also come in here and I can just select ping pong, and you'll see that it turns around. So it goes over and it turns around, goes over and it turns around. So it ping pongs back and forth. Loop out cycle, loop out ping pong. So let me show you kind of how I would use this, because I can do this in a number of ways. So let's zero this out. I'm going to make this ball bounce, and so let's just go like this. I'm going to separate dimensions so that we can get control. So on the Y position, halfway down, let's bounce like that. And really quick, I'm actually going to move my anchor point to be at the bottom. Okay, so we'll go up. There we go. Good. Okay, and then I'm going to have it come back up. Copy paste. Okay, so when it gets to the bottom here, I want it to squish, which is why I moved my thing. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to give myself a couple frames where it pauses. And so I'm just going to copy and paste that. Okay, and so now what it'll do is it goes down, it pauses, and then it goes back up. So it pauses in between here, it doesn't move. Okay, and so in that pause, I'm going to have it squish. So right here, I'm going to go scale, and then in the middle, I'm going to unlink these. I'm going to have it go out and down. Okay, and then it'll go back up. So let's copy this one, copy paste. Okay, and so now what it does is it hits, squishes, and then bounce back up. Hits, squishes, bounces back up. Okay, now if I do a loop out on these two things, Alt click, loop out. Okay, and then I can just press Command A, Command C to copy that. Go over here, Alt click, paste. Okay, now it'll loop through this, but you'll notice that it starts freaking out. Okay, the reason is it's looping through it. It'll loop through wherever it goes, and so I actually need to tell my scale, which doesn't have a keyframe at the same size, the same spot in the beginning and the end. It's going through and it plays through here. So as it plays through, it goes down, and then it starts looping through those 3 keyframes again, but I didn't tell it to pause. So if I want it to pause, I'm going to add a keyframe at the start, add a keyframe at the end, and then it will pause. So now it only does it in that one spot because everything's kind of lined up. That is loop out. Loop out is fun. I love it because you can just set a few keyframes and then tell it to loop out, and it'll just continue to do that for as long as the composition is. Puppet pen is a way to bend and warp and manipulate things so that they don't feel or look rigid. So, for example, in this example, you can see that the lid, it has a very slow wiggle expression on the rotation, but the worms are bending and gelatinous. And so let me show you really quick how you can do that. Basically, I'm going to take this big worm, and you can see that this is kind of its own separate thing. Okay, I'm going to take this big worm and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to choose, there's a bunch of these. I'm just going to choose puppet pin and I'm just going to hit the tip here like this. That adds this little mesh, and wherever I want it to bend or stay, then I can hit that. Okay, now there's two things I can do. One thing, I can come in here and I can say move up, and then I can move this. And I can say move down, and I can move this, I can say move back, right? And then it will do all of those movements for me. One of my favorite things to do with this, though, is the record feature. And so if you hold Control on a PC or Command on a Mac, then, and I need my pen for this, then you can, it'll record your movements. And so you can sit here and go little movements or big sweeping movements or slow drifting movements. And what it does is it throws down all of those keyframes for you in real time. You can also slow it down if you want. And you can do one pin at a time. So I'm going to come back, hold Control on the PC, and I'm going to do this other one so it just kind of goes nuts. Okay? And then I can come back in like this. And now both of those pins will move as recorded. So you'll notice that it's kind of breaking up here. I can still, after the fact, come back and add another puppet pin right there. So it locks that in place. Then it doesn't break. So lots of fun stuff that you can do. Basically, it bends things. And they've got them where you can rotate them and do all kinds of fancy things with it. You can also put a wiggle expression on the position of a pin, which is kind of fun as well. So then it randomly moves. Another thing that's really a good plugin to get for animation is called Rubber Hose. It's from Battle Axe. It's super awesome. So you take this, you line it up in the center, okay? And they've got tutorials and everything on this. And it matters how you select things. And so I'm going to select top, hold shift, then select bottom, then press the Rubber Hose button. What it does is it adds controllers. Okay, so now in the controllers, you can do different things. I'm going to turn realism up, and then I can grab this controller, and when I bend it, you'll notice that the other controller, or the other part of the leg, is rotating with it. And so, and you can also come in and I can say, oh, actually, I want it to bend the other way. And so let's go bend direction, and we'll go 100 that way, and so now it can bend this way. So anyway, it's really cool. But you can come in and you can attach things to this, and you can play with it, and you can do all kinds of different things. But it is pretty dang awesome. And for that matter, we've talked about wiggle already. Check out what you can do. I can put something. Let's move. Why is this not moving? Anyway, I can grab this controller and go P, and I can go Alt click, and let's go wiggle, and then I can say 3 times a second, move 75 pixels or whatever. And then what it'll do is you have random movement. And so if you just need things to kind of like randomly move, Rubber Hose is pretty awesome. And then you can combine it with like a wiggle expression or something like that. Also, each of these controllers can be parented to other things. So as other things move, they can follow them, which is also pretty cool. So I would parent the upper controller to like the shoulder of my guy. And so as my guy kind of moves around and does the thing, his arms will also just kind of follow him, and I don't have to animate each individual point because it just automatically does it for me. Another thing Rubber Hose does is it creates rubber hoses. And so if you just click this button, it just creates a rubber hose. And the cool thing about this rubber hose, let me grab the controller, is it bends. And so you can kind of get those little bendy deals, but it kind of bends and whips and stretches and whatever. And then inside of that, you can also control a lot of different things. The bend radius, so you can make it bend more or less. The hose length, right? You can do that, and all of these things can be keyframed. If you turn the realism up, then it won't stretch in on itself. So there's a lot of really cool. There's a lot of really cool different things that you can do. I like to lock things down a little bit, but But anyway, rubber hose, and you'll see another thing that I've done later on that uses several different types of these things. The last one is a like rubber pin. And in the rubber pin, it's just basically the puppet pin tool, but it gives you a shoulder, an elbow, and a wrist joint. And so you just do 3 puppet pins, you line them up, and you press the button, and then you can kind of manipulate things. And it acts sort of like the rubber rig, but it's instead of having 2 different pieces of things, it's bending and manipulating a single thing. So really awesome plugin. So this one is kind of a fun one too because it combines a number of things, but I just want to use it as an example of what you can do with joysticks and sliders because it's a little bit different than like the head turning thing. You'll notice just for a brief moment when the skin kind of peels off the bones of the fish, the dorsal fin kind of fan out and the mouth opens. And I do all that with joysticks and sliders. So I just wanted to show you. Let's watch it just one more time. A little flicker of that. So watch this. So you can see this controller down here. And you see all the bones, right? And they're all kind of laying down. And the mouth is shut. When I grab this controller and I move it down, you notice that everything fans out. And they're moving independently of each other. So that's what's really cool. Okay, so I can make them do that. And then in addition to that, if I move the controller forward, it opens the mouth, reverse closes the mouth. And so I can go up, down, and open, or I can stay open and close them, or I can close them and stay down, or I can go up. So I can kind of control that just by the X and Y axis. So that's what's really, really powerful about joysticks and sliders. So this one's a fun one of my favorites. There are so many different things that are controlling this. So I'll show you in a minute, but the head turns, they're all 2-dimensional, but they can look 3-dimensional based on how you're kind of doing this. And so you can see that I've got the hand, both hands, I've got the rotation of the bag, I've got the head, I've got the eyeballs, I've got all the different things, and they're all basically moving around on controllers. Let me show you kind of what I mean. So right here, you can see that everything is kind of a controller, and I'll just kind of loop this through. But he's bouncing, his eyes move around. The hat is actually doing a series of fairly complicated shape tweens. These are vibrating. And his fingers will open and close. I can change the fingers. You see that they spread if I move the controller to the right. They're going to close and rotate if I move it to the left. And it kind of pixelates as I do this in live action, but it'll anyway, basically as you keyframe it, it'll do stuff. So you can control all kinds of really interesting things. So if we zoom back out here, let's just do this. I can show you kind of the head rotation. So the head can look up, can look over, can look to the left or the right. And as it does that, each one of these things is controlled. And so joysticks and sliders, anything that can be keyframed can be attached to a joystick, which can be controlled by one joystick, or you can control multiple parts of things by a number of joysticks. So I'm just going to do one of these just to kind of show you what's going on. But basically what happens is that the first one is your middle position. Your second one is the right, then left, then up, then down. And those are the first frames of the thing, and then you bind them to the joysticks and sliders. So there's just these controllers over here, and I've got the middle position already. I've got that position. So let's do left, okay? And so I'm going to grab all of these and just hit origin, and that'll just reset me to the left there. And then each one of these, I just move it over. And so let's start with the big one. Where's the big one? Is that the big one? Okay, so I'm just going to get it all the way to the side, and then I'm going to scale it so it looks like, it doesn't actually work like this, but it looks like it's turning to the side. Okay, so then I'll just move each one of these over one at a time and just scale it so it feels like it would feel. I'm going to have it like kind of drop back in as if it's kind of recessed in there. And the next one, let's get the other one over there. Okay, kind of shrink that down. Make that feel like it's recessed in. Drop it back just a touch. Okay, scale that down. Move it over just a bit. Okay, and so now this is what it looks like in the middle. This is what it looks like in the right. This is what it looks like that way. Okay, and then I would do up and down or whatever. So just for the time, I'm just going to put origins in each one of these. Page down, jump forward. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I can select everything like so. Okay, I've got all that selected, and I can say create new joystick. I'm going to say like test thing. Okay, and click OK. Okay, and now I can just move this joystick over here like this, and let me put some color behind this so we can see what's going on. And so when I take this and I move this controller to the left or the right, it adjusts accordingly. Now, had I done up and down, it would also do that. That's the basics of joysticks and sliders. But the cool thing is that you can literally do anything. And so I like to kind of do this, where we'll grab this. I'm gonna go position. I'm gonna right click, separate dimensions, and then on the X position, I'm gonna add a wiggle expression. Okay, and I'm gonna say, let's just make it go really fast. So 10 times a second. So wiggle expression, go 10 times a second. I want you to move 300 pixels because this is 200 in either direction, 400 wide. And so then it's just going to kind of like freak out, right? No keyframes on that. But I can come in and say, let's slow that down. Let's say once a second. And then it'll just kind of just look back and forth. But it's randomly generating that number in that thing. So probably have it should get bigger in the middle because it looks a little strange. But anyway, that's joysticks and sliders. So this one's a really quick one. There's a tool called Overlord, and it pulls things from Illustrator into After Effects and pushes things from After Effects into Illustrator. So for example, if I have this dealio right here and I want to add another keyframe to it, I can mouse over these buttons and I can say push selection to Illustrator. And then I can come in and I can adjust in Illustrator, which has much better vector controls than in After Effects does. I hate After Effects vector controls. They are not great. And then when I'm done with it, on the Illustrator side of things, I can say push back to AE. Or I can jump over here and I can adjust where I want this to happen, select it, and pull. And then it adds that keyframe for me. And so you can use Illustrator for what Illustrator is good for, which is creating and manipulating vector paths, and After Effects for what After Effects is good for, which is everything else. So I love Overlord too. Overlord's pretty cool. So this one is an example of a number of things that we've already talked about. You can see that as the cheese drops, I use the scale to squish it, so it goes down and out and then kind of bounces back. You can see the rotation of the head, the blinking of the eye is the loop out expression. You can see the puppet pin of the tail there, kind of wiggling around when it's a skeleton. You can see the rubber hose of the tail when it's not a skeleton, and joysticks and sliders are controlling the arms and the arm position and the ears and where the ears are. So you can kind of combine a number of these things together to basically put controls on things. So just kind of cool.